Hello everyone, welcome back to Scary Dark Narrations. Tonight, we are diving into a shadowy corner of the world that was never meant to be seen by the public. In this episode, you'll hear about 4 private islands, so secretive, so heavily protected, that only the world's most powerful elites have ever set foot on them. These are not tropical vacation spots you'll find in glossy travel magazines. These are places wrapped in silence, guarded by money, influence, and fear. Each story uncovers disturbing truths whispered behind closed doors, accounts pieced together from leaked records, investigative reports, and testimonies that were never meant to reach the light. From islands hidden behind shell companies and fake charities, to secluded compounds where visitors arrive but questions are never answered, to locations so restricted that even locals are warned never to get too close. These are not conspiracy fantasies. They are documented mysteries tied to real people, real money, and real power. To protect sources and avoid legal risk, some details and names have been altered, but the disturbing core of each case remains unchanged. What happened on these islands didn't stay there. It left traces, victims, and unanswered questions that still haunt those who know the truth. These islands exist outside normal rules, outside justice, outside accountability. And tonight, you're going to learn why certain places are protected not for privacy, but to keep secrets buried forever. If you're new here, subscribe to Scary Dark Narrations for true dark stories that expose what powerful people try to hide. Turn on notifications, because once you step into these shadows, you'll start seeing the world very differently. I didn't expect the island to feel quiet when I first saw it on the screen, because places with reputations like that usually hum with noise in my head. But Little St. James appeared almost serene, framed by water so blue it felt unreal, like a postcard someone had left out too long in the sun. I remember the exact moment my unease started, not with a scream or a revelation, but with a detail that wouldn't settle. 70 acres of land, perfectly manicured, floating in the Caribbean like it wanted to be admired. And yet the longer I stared, the more it felt like it was staring back at me. I was sitting alone at my desk, late, the office lights dimmed to save electricity, scrolling through documents that had been public for years and somehow still felt forbidden. My job had trained me to look for patterns, to let facts speak without emotion. But that night my chest felt tight, like I was breathing air that didn't quite belong to me. My routine was simple back then. Wake up early, black coffee, an hour of reading before work. Evenings spent sifting through records most people avoided because they were tedious or uncomfortable. I told myself I was chasing truth, but if I'm honest, I think I was chasing the feeling that comes right before fear. That subtle shift when something ordinary turns slightly wrong. The flight logs were supposed to be boring. Numbers, dates, tail numbers, routes. Instead, they felt intimate, like diaries written by machines. Each line represented bodies moving through space. Choices made, doors closed. I read them the way you might read someone else's private messages, aware that you weren't meant to know these things, but unable to stop. The island's name came up again and again, always the same destination, always surrounded by familiar routes. New York, Palm Beach, Paris. The repetition should have been comforting, predictable, but it wasn't. It felt rehearsed. I started to notice gaps, moments where the logs became vague, where names dissolved into initials or disappeared entirely. At first, I blamed bureaucracy. Then I noticed how often those omissions clustered around certain trips, certain years. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the buildings settle around me. The faint creak of pipes, the hum of distant traffic. The room felt smaller, like the walls had shifted closer without asking. What unsettled me most wasn't the presence of powerful names, because power always leaves fingerprints, but the absence of others. Jane Doe. Initials. Blank spaces, where people should have been. The language used to describe them was careful, almost tender. Words like assistant or student that floated on the page without weight. I tried to imagine myself boarding a private plane. Name erased, identity reduced to a placeholder, and my stomach tightened. These weren't just records of travel. They were records of erasure. The logs didn't tell me what happened on the island, but they told me who didn't matter enough to be remembered. As the hours passed, my sense of time began to blur. I would check the clock and feel surprised by the number staring back at me, like it had jumped ahead while I wasn't looking. Outside, the city quieted, leaving behind a hollow stillness that pressed against the windows. I kept reading, drawn deeper by a pattern that was forming without ever announcing itself. Certain routes appeared with mechanical regularity, always stopping somewhere else first, always collecting more passengers before making the final descent. It reminded me of a machine warming up, each component slipping into place. The pilot's testimonies added another layer, one I hadn't expected to feel so personal. They spoke about instructions given casually, names left unrecorded as if it were a small favor, an insignificant omission. I imagined the scratch of pen on paper, the deliberate pause before skipping a line, and it made my skin crawl. This wasn't chaos. It was order, quietly enforced. I realized then that the fear I was feeling wasn't about what might have happened, but about how calmly it could happen at all. Images of the island's structures filled my screen next. Satellite shots and drone footage taken after everything fell apart. From above, it looked like a resort designed to impress, but certain details didn't fit. The temple-like building with its striped walls and golden dome felt out of place, like a prop left behind after a performance. Underground spaces hinted at by construction plans. Rooms without windows. Doors reinforced beyond necessity. I found myself holding my breath as I scrolled, as if the images could hear me. The idea of soundproofed rooms on a private island made my thoughts spiral, not toward gore or spectacle, but toward silence, the kind that absorbs everything you throw into it. By the time I reached the end of that night's reading, the pattern had fully emerged. The flights increased year by year, the traffic growing heavier, more African, until the island felt less like a destination and more like a hub. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself there were innocent explanations, but my mind kept returning to the same image. Planes arriving and leaving with the rhythm of a heartbeat, steady and relentless. I shut down my computer and sat there in the dark, listening to my own breathing. Then, without warning, the power flickered, plunging the room into silence that felt too complete, like something had just finished listening. After that night, the logs followed me into my waking hours, threading themselves through my thoughts. While I stood in line for coffee or waited for traffic lights to change, the world looked the same, but it felt thinner, as if the surface had worn down and something underneath was beginning to show through. I returned to the documents with a sharper focus, my attention narrowing as the pace of revelations quickened. The flights weren't just frequent, they were coordinated. Arrivals and departures overlapping in ways that suggested a rotation, a deliberate exchange. People came and went within days, sometimes hours. Their presence on the island reduced to a brief notation before being swept away. I began to notice how often calm preceded the most disturbing details. A harmless route description, followed by a sudden omission. A mundane maintenance note, followed by testimony about being told not to ask questions. The contrast was jarring, like a quiet room where you suddenly realize someone has been standing behind you the entire time. My sleep suffered. I would lie awake, replaying phrases from the testimonies, the casual tone used to describe things that should never be casual. In those moments, my own memories felt unreliable, as if my mind were editing itself the way the logs had been edited, smoothing over discomfort to preserve function. The more I read, the more personal it became. Accounts from those who had been trafficked to the island described a constant turnover, faces changing, names forgotten as quickly as they were learned. The island, in these stories, wasn't just a place but a process, one that consumed and redistributed people along a network that spanned continents. I found myself gripping the edges of my desk, a strange guilt creeping in, the feeling that by knowing this, by reading these words, I was complicit in their continued existence. Knowledge didn't feel like power anymore. It felt like... Wait. Construction records deepened the sense of dread. Money poured into the island year after year, not just for luxury, but for infrastructure that spoke of permanence and control. Tunnels, reinforced spaces, security systems more complex than necessary. I imagined walking those underground corridors, the air thick and unmoving, every sound swallowed before it could echo. The thought lingered long after I closed the files, manifesting in the way shadows stretched in my apartment, bending at angles that made my eyes ache. Then came the twist that shifted everything. A second island, purchased quietly, developed aggressively, its purpose left deliberately vague. The timeline didn't make sense unless you assumed continuation, expansion rather than conclusion. Even after arrest, after exposure, the machinery had already been built, already set in motion. The idea that this network could outlive its architect unsettled me more than any single crime. It suggested a system designed to adapt, to survive scrutiny by changing shape. I started to feel watched, not in a paranoid sense, but in the way you feel when you realize you've been standing in front of a mirror too long, studying details no one else notices. My phone buzzed unexpectedly one evening. A wrong number. A brief silence on the line before it disconnected. It meant nothing, but it stayed with me. The boundary between the story and my life blurred. Reality becoming unreliable in small, insidious ways. I questioned my motives, my memories, even my fear. Was I reacting to evidence, or to the idea of it? The point of no return came quietly. I reached the sealed portions, the references to materials that still existed somewhere, locked away, protected by legal language that felt cold and impersonal. The thought that answers were sitting in a federal locker, inaccessible, made my chest tighten. This wasn't a mystery waiting to be solved. It was a wound, deliberately kept open, festering under layers of procedure and silence. I closed the file, knowing I wouldn't be able to step back into ignorance, even if I wanted to. By the time I stopped reading, the story had already embedded itself into my sense of time. Days looped, nights stretched, and I caught myself rechecking details I already knew, as if repetition might change their meaning. The truth surfaced in fragments, never whole, always slipping away just as it began to take shape. The island became less a location and more a memory that didn't belong to me, one that pressed against my thoughts with quiet insistence. I imagined the flights continuing without records, the routes repeating long after the logs stopped, faces blurred, names forgotten, the machinery humming along because that's what it was built to do. The idea that consequences could feel so distant, so abstract, frightened me more than any explicit horror. This was a story without an ending, only pauses. Even the sale listing for the island felt unreal, a price tag attached to something that should never be owned again. No offers came, as if the land itself rejected the idea of being claimed. In moments of false safety, I told myself it was over, that exposure had done its work. Then a headline would surface, a reminder that silence is resilient, that memory fades when it becomes inconvenient. Time slipped again, folding in on itself, and I realized how easily this could all be forgotten, relegated to a footnote in history. That realization settled over me like a curse, heavy and inescapable. The island still exists, quiet and sunlit, holding on to whatever it remembers. And sometimes, late at night, when the world feels too still, I think about those blank spaces in the logs, the names that were never written down, and I feel the same unease I felt that first night, staring at the screen, realizing that some places don't need ghosts because they remember everything. Would you dare go back, knowing what waits? The first thing I remember about the island is how quiet it felt, as if the wind itself had signed a non-disclosure agreement. From the air, it looked unreal, a crescent of white sand wrapped around turquoise water so clear it seemed staged. I had been invited for what was described as a private networking retreat, an opportunity of a lifetime for someone like me. A young entrepreneur still pretending he belonged in rooms filled with people whose watches cost more than my car. Everyone smiled easily. The island ran on routine. Morning panels about philanthropy, afternoon strategy sessions under canvas canopies, evenings filled with curated dinners where billion-dollar ideas were discussed between courses of imported delicacies. It should have felt intoxicating. Instead, it felt rehearsed. The same jokes circulated. The same names were praised. I told myself I was projecting, that imposter syndrome had sharpened my senses into paranoia. I began noticing the staff on my second night. Young women introduced as premium hospitality concierge. They were assigned individually to certain guests and did not rotate like typical staff would. Each shadowed a specific attendee with polite stillness, rarely speaking unless addressed directly. When I made casual conversation with one of them near the pool, she smiled without moving her eyes. Her name, she told me, was Temporary. That was how it sounded. Temporary. As if she had practiced saying it without revealing anything real. I asked one of the coordinators about the arrangement. He explained it was a personalized experience for high-tier guests, delivered in a tone so polished it reflected no light. The answer felt rehearsed, almost memorized. That night, I lay awake in my villa, listening to the ocean press against the rocks. The waves moved in steady rhythm, but something else moved with them. A faint mechanical thrum that did not belong to water or wind. On the third evening, the mood shifted. Several staff members were dismissed early, told they had the weekend off with full pay. I overheard a security guard reading a text message twice before deleting it. Helicopter rotors later carved through the night, slicing the silence open. The sound did not approach from the visible helipad. It came from somewhere beyond the tree line, deeper inland. I told myself it was logistics, supplies, VIP. After dinner, I wandered away from the main gathering. The path toward the northern villas was roped off with a velvet barrier that had not been there before. A subtle sign indicated the area was reserved. No explanation. No apology. Just reserved. The torches along that path flickered against the wind, and for a moment I thought I saw figures moving beyond the tree line, silhouettes that paused when I did. The wind scraped across the glass doors of the nearest villa like skeletal fingers. Later, while pretending to admire the stars, I heard a woman crying. It was not loud. It was controlled, like someone trying to muffle themselves. The sound came from inland, from the direction of the restricted villas. I waited for someone else to react. No one did. Conversations continued. Laughter rose and fell. Glasses clinked. I stood frozen, telling myself it was imagination shaped by too many late-night documentaries and rumors I had once dismissed as conspiracy. I returned to my room unsettled. My phone had no signal. The island's internal network displayed a welcome screen but would not connect to anything external. I told myself that privacy was part of the luxury. Isolation sold at a premium, yet the walls felt thicker than necessary, and the windows reflected my own image with a delay, as if the room needed a second to process who I was. I slept lightly, waking at every shift of the air conditioner. Just before dawn, I heard footsteps outside my door. Slow, measured. They paused directly in front of my room. I held my breath, waiting for a knock. That never came. The handle did not turn, but I sensed someone standing there, listening the way I was listening. Minutes passed, maybe longer. When I finally forced myself to look through the peephole, the corridor was empty. At breakfast, everyone behaved as if nothing had happened. Sunlight washed the island in impossible beauty. Smiling faces, crisp linens, fresh fruit arranged like art. I considered leaving early, inventing an emergency back home, but the departure schedule was controlled. Boats left in groups, surrounded by water, guarded docks, curated access. There was nowhere to go without permission. That evening, as the sky bruised purple and gold, the helicopter returned. This time it landed closer. I stood on my balcony and saw figures escorted quickly into one of the northern villas. Among them, I recognized one of the young concierge. She was not walking beside her assigned guest. She was walking between two men I had not seen before. Lights went out. I stopped sleeping after that night. The island's beauty began to feel aggressive, as if it were overcompensating for something rotten beneath it. Panels continued. Investors applauded innovation. The host delivered speeches about connection and impact. I watched mouths move and heard nothing but the echo of that abrupt silence. The concierge I had spoken to did not appear at breakfast. When I asked casually about her, I was told she had rotated off the island early due to scheduling adjustments. The explanation arrived too quickly, like a card pulled from a prepared deck. That afternoon, I noticed the routine tightening. Security personnel who had once blended into the background now stood at measured intervals along the beach. A door near the central pavilion, usually propped open for staff traffic, remained closed. When the wind pushed against it, the hinges groaned in a way that sounded almost human. I passed by and heard something inside. Not conversation. A whispering current. Layered voices speaking too softly to form words. The sound stopped when my shadow touched the frame. I began questioning my memory. Had the crying been real? Had the footsteps paused outside my door? The island distorted time. Days felt stretched thin, while nights collapsed into sharp fragments. I found myself checking my watch repeatedly, convinced minutes were disappearing. During one dinner, I blinked, and the dessert course was already served, though I had no recollection of the main. My glass refilled itself. My plate changed without my noticing. On the fourth night, the power flickered during a speech about ethical leadership. The room dipped into darkness for a breath too long. In that breath, I heard a voice directly behind me say my name. Not loudly, not urgently, simply spoken close enough that I felt warmth against my ear. I turned. No one stood there. The lights returned. The speech continued, uninterrupted. I scanned faces around me, searching for recognition, for guilt, for acknowledgement. Primera, found none. I tried to access the island's restricted area the next morning under the guise of exploring nature trails. He informed me that certain zones were undergoing maintenance and were unsafe for guests. His eyes held mine a fraction too long, as if measuring whether I would comply. I nodded and retreated, my pulse loud in my ears. As I walked back toward the main villas, I felt the island watching me, trees leaning inward, shadows stretching across the path in unnatural angles. Later that day, I found a ledger in the small business lounge near the dock. It was not meant for guests. It sat partially hidden beneath shipping manifests. Names were written in neat columns. Arrival times, departure times. Some entries were crossed out with a single line. Others bore no departure at all. I scanned the list quickly, recognizing several high-profile figures whose presence had not been publicly acknowledged. My own name appeared. The arrival time was accurate. The departure line, however, was already filled in. It listed a date 2 days ahead, followed by a time I had not agreed to. A chill threaded through me. I closed the book and stepped back, heart hammering. The dock beyond the window was empty, yet I sensed movement below it, as if something shifted beneath the planks. The ocean lapped gently, indifferent. I considered confronting someone. I imagined the response. Confusion, concern, perhaps a suggestion that I was overwhelmed by the intensity of networking. Gaslighting would arrive disguised as hospitality. That night, the helicopter did not come. Instead, a boat approached without lights. I watched from my balcony as it docked in near total darkness. Figures disembarked quickly, escorted inland along the restricted path. One counted 5 silhouettes. One stumbled. The torches along the route remained unlit, yet I could see them clearly, outlined by a pale glow that seemed to emanate from the sand itself. The island remembered their steps before they took them. My phone buzzed unexpectedly, though there was still no service. A single text appeared from an unknown number. It contained only 3 words. You noticed too much. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. When I looked up, a figure stood at the edge of my balcony. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could see the outline of a face in shadow. I blinked. The figure was gone. My door remained locked from the inside. Panic settled into my bones like damp cold. I packed my bag, intending to demand immediate departure. As I stepped into the corridor, I heard doors closing in sequence down the hall, one after another, as if the building itself were sealing. Footsteps echoed behind me. When primera torned, the hallway stretched longer than before, lights flickering at intervals that did not align. I began walking faster. The carpet muffled my steps, yet the echo behind me grew louder, closer, matching my pace. I reached the main pavilion to find it empty. Chairs overturned. Glassware cleared. The island felt abandoned, as though everyone had left without telling me. I ran toward the dock. No boats. No staff. only the ocean and the distant hum of something mechanical deep inland. My watch read midnight, though the sky held a faint wash of pre-dawn gray. Time no longer obeyed itself. As I stood there, breath ragged, the ledger book appeared on the dock beside me. I had left it in the lounge. It lay open to my name. The departure time had changed. It now listed the current hour. Beneath it, in handwriting that did not match the previous entries, a note had been added. Retained. I felt the ground tilt subtly, the planks shifting under my weight. From inland, I heard my name again, carried on a whisper that did not belong to wind or a human throat. In that moment, I understood that leaving was no longer an option. Something on this island had already decided my role. I do not remember how I returned to my villa that night. One moment I stood on the dock staring at that impossible ledger, and the next I was seated on my bed with sand clinging to my feet. My bag remained packed. The zipper was half open, as if interrupted mid. Outside, the ocean roared louder than before, waves striking the rocks with violent rhythm. The wind scraped across the glass like skeletal fingers, demanding entry. I pressed my palms against my ears, but the sound tunneled through bone. Morning arrived without transition. Sunlight flooded the room too quickly, too bright, erasing the violence of the night as though it had been edited out. A schedule appeared on my bedside table outlining the final day's farewell brunch and departure logistics. My name was included among the confirmed exits. I almost laughed. The island rewrote reality with professional ease. I stepped outside and found guests milling about as if nothing had fractured. Conversations resumed laughter felt pasted on. I searched for the concierge I had first spoken to. Instead, I saw another young woman standing beside the same high-profile guest, her smile identical, her posture rehearsed. For a split second, I thought it was the same person, altered slightly, like a memory misaligned. When our eyes met, something flickered there. Recognition or warning, I could not tell. She looked away immediately. During Brunt, the host toasted to transparency, to innovation, to trust. Applause followed on cue. I felt detached from my own body, observing myself nodding politely, my fork hovered above untouched fruit. The ocean beyond the terrace shimmered, almost luminous, as if lit from beneath. I had this sudden, overwhelming sense that the island itself was alive, not in a mystical way, but in a systemic one, like a machine that processed people instead of data. It recorded arrivals. It managed departure. It retained what it required. When the time came to leave, guests were escorted to boats in small groups. My name was called. Relief surged through me so intensely it bordered on hysteria. I stepped onto the dock, ledger nowhere in sight. The boat's engine idled patiently. I climbed aboard, avoiding eye contact with anyone. As we pulled away, I looked back at the island. From this distance, it appeared innocent again. Palm trees swaying gently, villas gleaming in the sun. For a moment, I wondered if exhaustion had birthed every nightmare. Halfway to the mainland hub, the engine sputtered. The boat slowed, then stopped entirely. The captain frowned, muttering about mechanical issues. I glanced back at the island. It seemed closer than it should have been. The water between us rippled unnaturally, forming concentric circles that pulsed outward. My phone buzzed again, despite having no service. A notification displayed a calendar reminder. Departure postponed. When I looked up, the island was no longer behind us. It surrounded us. The horizon had shifted. Water stretched in every direction. Yet the villas rose ahead, identical to before. The boat drifted toward the same dock I had left minutes earlier. No one else on board appeared alarmed. They chatted casually, checking watches that seemed frozen. I tried to speak, to shout, but my voice felt muffled, absorbed by thick air. The dock received us gently. Staff waited with the same polite smiles. Back in my villa, my packed bag sat untouched. The schedule on the bedside table now listed my stay as extended. No explanation. No apology. I began to understand the pattern. Arrival. Observation. Retention. The island did not need chains or locked doors. It manipulated perception, rewrote time, erased witnesses by folding them back into routine. Memory fractured under its weight. I tried to recall the mainland clearly. The noise of traffic, the smell of rain on concrete. Those details felt distant, fading like photographs left in sun. Nights grew heavier. I heard whispers inside the walls, voices layered atop one another, repeating fragments of conversations I had once had, secrets I had never spoken aloud. The island knew my doubts. It recited my private fears in tones that mimicked my own. I began to question whether I had been invited for networking at all. Perhaps I had been selected long before I received that polished email. Perhaps everyone here had been chosen for a reason they did not yet understand. I stopped searching for exits. Instead, I observed. New arrivals came with the same wide-eyed ambition I once carried. I saw myself in them, saw the subtle moment when unease replaced awe. Some disappeared into the restricted villas. Others boarded boats that never seemed to travel far enough. The ledger no longer needed to appear physically. I felt it updating somewhere unseen, ink drying on names that believed they still had agency. The most terrifying realization was not that I might never leave. It was that parts of me were beginning to adapt. The fear dulled at the edges. The routine seeped back in. I found myself attending panels again, nodding at familiar phrases, accepting that isolation could be reframed as privilege. The island fed on compliance, on the gradual surrender of resistance. Places remember. I once heard someone say, "This place did more than remember." Eat, curated. Now, when helicopters arrive after midnight, I no longer flinch. When the wind drags its nails across the glass, I listen instead of resisting. I stand on the balcony and watch new guests step onto the sand, their laughter bright against the dark. I want to warn them, to tell them that paradise can be a perimeter and silence can be a verdict. But the words never form. They dissolve before reaching my tongue. The island has learned my voice. Sometimes, late at night, I hear it speaking through me, welcoming newcomers, assuring them that everything here is exactly as it seems. And perhaps, eventually, I will believe that too, because the most effective prison is the one that convinces you it is a reward. The water remains calm. The sky remains flawless. Transparency never comes, and somewhere, in a ledger no one else can see, my departure line stays permanently unfinished. Would you dare go back, knowing what waits? The night carried a weight I couldn't explain, a silent pressure that settled on my chest before my boots even touched the deck. I had sailed these waters most of my life, long enough to know the sea's many moods. Yet something about that evening felt wrong from the instant the sun slipped beneath the horizon. The air was warmer than it should have been, unnaturally still, as if the open Ionian Sea itself was holding its breath. My name is Nikos Papadopoulos. I am 52 years old, and I have spent 4 decades surviving storms, treacherous currents, and the sea's sudden cruelty. Still, nothing I had faced prepared me for what waited that night. Scorpio's Island had always been spoken of in whispers among fishermen, a name followed by uneasy silences and crossed fingers. No one called it Scorpios anymore. They called it the Island of Screams. I had always dismissed such talk. I never believed in legends or curses. Superstition, I told myself, was for tourists looking to turn fear into entertainment. That night, for the first time in my life, the sea made me question everything I thought I knew. My hands rested on the wheel as the engine hummed its steady rhythm, each pulse grounding me in a world I thought I knew. The sea smelled of brine and late summer warmth, carrying the faint scent of distant pine from the coast. The water stilled unnaturally, not the gentle lull of a calm evening, but an oppressive, absolute silence that seemed to suck the sound from the air itself. There were no waves, no gulls crying, just nothing. A vacuum that pressed against my ears and hollowed my chest. The island's silhouette was familiar jagged cliffs rising from the water. Wrong. The air seemed to hum around it, a low vibration that crawled beneath my skin. They moved in patterns that made no sense, a rhythm that should not exist outside human sight. The scent of burning something I couldn't name reached me across the water, sharp and acrid. Then, the screams began. At first, faint, almost imagined, but they grew, layering over each other, high-pitched and desperate, emanating from the island itself. They weren't coming from the figures. The figures remained eerily silent, their heads bowed, or faces obscured. The sound seeped into my bones, making my teeth ache and my heart pound in uneven rhythms. My hands trembled, though I told myself it was the wind, or exhaustion. It turned toward me, and all movement froze for a heartbeat too long. Then, in perfect unison, every figure followed the gaze. They shouldn't have been able to do that. They shouldn't exist in any physical sense that I could name. Every electronic device on my boat died simultaneously, leaving me with nothing but the cold, thick darkness and the figure's silent approach. The lights and flames blurred behind me, replaced by darkness that seemed to reach, to cling. My boat was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. Then, silence swallowed everything. The days that followed were worse than the night itself. At night, the screams returned across the water, never the same twice, each one dragging me closer to some edge I didn't want to recognize. My sleep became fragmented, punctuated by the faint echo of chanting or the crackle of flame. A week later, I heard that another fisherman had reported similar phenomena near the island, but the details were messy, improbable. The local police treated my report as a curiosity, a stress-induced hallucination from someone too long at sea. I began to realize that no one was supposed to witness what happened. No one was supposed to survive it and still speak. My routine became a fragile cage. I avoided looking at the horizon, avoided even naming the island aloud. Or had something else been watching me all along, manipulating my mind until the truth itself felt like a lie? She was meticulous, methodical, tracing decades of reports about the island's 17 people over 40 years. Deeds from the 1960s referenced original inhabitants, and the Onassis family retained ownership. untouched by anyone else. Elena insisted on visiting, despite my attempts to dissuade her, despite the pleading in my voice. But curiosity, like greed, like every human desire to see the forbidden, pulled her forward. The night she went to the island, I couldn't sleep. My dreams were punctured by visions of her walking along the dock, chimera and shadows flickering across her path. I imagined the voice, guttural and ancient, speaking her name. I imagined her screaming, and then, in the morning, no call came. I became untethered from routine, from sleep, from anything that offered comfort. The sea was no longer my friend. Whispers licked at the edges of my consciousness. Yet even in the crowded streets of Lefkida, I could feel eyes following me, intangible and yet undeniable, events repeated, loops of dread that I could not escape. I understood with a clarity that terrified me. Scorpios was not simply an island. It was a sentinel, a temple, a prison. It remembered, and it fed not on flesh, but on attention, on memory, on curiosity itself. My mind twisted around this realization. The Onassis family had made their pact decades ago with something older, something patient, something that required witnesses and then removed them. The pattern was clear. Those who saw could not live, and those who survived would never speak of it fully without fear consuming them. I have survived, but survival feels hollow. I live quietly on Lefkida now, serving tourists, speaking in polite tones, smiling when required. But the night comes for me in fragments. Sometimes I hear screams across the water, and I know it is not the wind. Time itself has become unreliable. Minutes stretch 2 hours. Occasionally, when I approach the shoreline to look for my boat, the water is unnaturally calm, and then the shadows appear, out of nowhere, walking on the water, converging toward me with impossible precision. I flinch. I dive. I run, but I know it will not end. The event is not singular. It waits, always, for the curious, the daring, the foolish. Elena's fate is etched into my memory. The loops of her terror replaying in colors and sounds that no camera could capture fully. The other 17 who reported before us gone, erased, some quietly, some violently. My existence is punishment, my voice a whisper that must never grow too loud. I've tried rational explanations, logical theories, even medical ones. Delirium, hallucination, ocean-induced psychosis, but none account for the consistency, the repetition, the timing. None explain the green and blue flames, the robed figures, the hollow hoods, the chanting voice that spoke across decades. None explained why the island remembers, why it waits, why it feeds. I cannot unsee what I have seen. I cannot unhear what I have heard. The locals know. They do not investigate because some knowledge is more dangerous than ignorance. And the island endures, a reminder of ancient bargains, older than wealth, older than man, older than memory itself. They are eternal. Yet sometimes, late at night, when the wind is still and the water glints silver under the moon, I hear something that twists my stomach into knots, the sound of distant screams, footsteps on water, by fear, by memory. Be attention. And the island of screams is always hungry. You will return. I arrived on the island in the late afternoon, the sun dipping low over the Caribbean waters. painting everything gold and uneasy. At first glance, it looked like paradise rolling greenery, jagged cliffs, and a harbor so still it seemed unreal. But the moment I stepped off the boat, a faint tension prickled under my skin, a whisper at the edge of awareness. The place was silent, yet not empty. I could feel it watching me, a subtle pressure against the back of my neck, though there was nothing there, not yet. The island had been bought legally, of course. Papers signed, ownership transferred, money exchanged. Emerald Horizon Holdings LLC, a name as sterile as the fluorescent lights in a lawyer's office, held the deed. But who was behind it? Nobody knew. The thought alone sent a ripple through my mind, a cold shiver that crept along my spine. The roads leading inland were paved but narrow, lined with trees whose shadows bent in impossible directions as the light fell across them. I passed the initial construction site, and my heart kicked in. Concrete walls had risen unnaturally fast, guard towers standing like black sentinels, satellite dishes pointed in every direction, their angles precise, purposeful. Men moved with a choreographed urgency, carrying crates and machinery, their faces set and unreadable. Not vacationers, not builders who cared about aesthetics or comfort. Something else was happening here, and it whispered beneath the hum of diesel engines and the scrape of machinery. I stayed at a small dock cabin, the only structure open to outsiders. The interior smelled of salt, diesel, and paint, but underlying it was another odor, subtle and fleeting metallic, almost like fear itself. I unpacked lightly, keeping my phone close, though signals were weak. A strange buzz echoed faintly through the walls, a vibration that seemed to align with my heartbeat. I chalked it up to nerves. Or maybe not. By evening, the shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching across the hills like they were reaching for me. I saw movement in the tree line, quick, deliberate, but when I looked again, nothing. Just leaves, just wind. Yet I knew I had seen something. Footsteps, maybe, or eyes. My own reflection in a small pond trembled oddly, like the water remembered something I didn't. I tried to eat dinner, but I couldn't stop listening. Every distant clang, every soft thump in the soil felt amplified, a hidden rhythm syncing with a part of me I didn't want to confront. The first night was worse. I thought I slept, but dreams slipped into waking consciousness seamlessly. I saw men moving underground, carving out spaces beneath the surface. Reinforced concrete vaults, tunnels, communication centers. Why here? The thought burrowed under my ribs. My hands shook as I scribbled notes. The shadows on the walls flickered as if alive, bending like they were aware of my presence. Then, silence swallowed everything. The wind stopped, the water stilled, even my thoughts seemed to hush, and I was alone with the feeling that something had noticed me, something patient, intelligent, and very, very still. Morning brought a false comfort. Birds chirped, the sun rose lazily, and the compound seemed almost mundane in daylight. I walked along the edge of the harbor. Barges had been here, carrying materials beyond imagination. Generators, industrial-grade communications equipment, crates labeled in languages I didn't recognize. Workers nodded politely when I passed, but their eyes betrayed nothing. No warmth, no curiosity, no human hesitation. Only discipline. Only secrecy. By midday, I noticed the first signs of layering. Documents had been leaked online. Mentions of subsidiary companies in Cayman, Panama, Cyprus, bank accounts tied to Swiss private banks, co-signatories with names that didn't exist. The more I learned, the heavier my chest became, as if understanding their network weighed down my very bones. One alias had been traced to human trafficking investigations years prior. My stomach twisted. The island was beautiful, untouched, but beneath it, beneath the concrete and sand, something dark was breathing, waiting. Night came faster than I expected, and I found myself standing on the edge of a cliff overlooking the harbor. Shadows stretched too far, bending where they shouldn't, and the water reflected the moon like a mirror warped by an invisible hand. I thought I saw figures on the docks, young men and women moving with quiet urgency, carrying supplies from boats to the compound. I blinked. They were gone. My pulse raced. I realized I wasn't just an observer. I was part of their world now, marked by curiosity, drawn into a rhythm I didn't understand. The air smelled of salt and something else, metallic, bitter, forbidden. Then I heard it. A soft vibration, almost imperceptible, running beneath the soil. Footsteps. Machinery. Something alive beneath the earth. My flashlight flickered as if the darkness itself was breathing with me, inhaling, exhaling, patient and precise. And somewhere, deep inside the compound, a door opened that wasn't supposed to open. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't leave. Every corner of that island whispered at me, hinting at tunnels, hidden communications, and things that weren't meant to exist in daylight. I understood instinctively that the island wasn't built for vacation. It was a sanctuary, a prison, a fortress, for something that didn't belong in the world I knew. And as I lay awake listening to the impossible silence that had swallowed the island, I knew the first undeniable truth. I was no longer safe. Not a billionaire. By the second week, the routine of observation had transformed into obsession. I followed every movement from dawn until dusk, noting the yachts that appeared flagged from Liberia, Panama, the Marshall Islands, names I had seen before in criminal investigations. One had been stopped by Italian authorities in 2019, suspicion of smuggling etched into its official record. Another tied to a Russian shell company. Each vessel docked briefly, unloaded cargo, and departed like shadows evaporating in the sun. My mind kept running numbers, tracing connections, building patterns, but the more I learned, the less I understood. Footsteps began echoing at night, not outside, but within the cabin. A tap on the window, a brush against the walls. My own memories began betraying me. I remembered conversations I never had, noises I hadn't heard, a laugh in the wind, distant, too human to be nature. I would swear I saw figures standing in doorways I knew didn't exist. I started talking to myself, whispering notes aloud to validate my own perceptions. Was the sound coming from me, or something watching me? I could no longer tell. One afternoon, I found myself at the edge of the security fence. The towers loomed overhead, silent sentinels. My camera caught glimpses of men moving below in underground vents, the entrances partially obscured by earth and shadows. I saw reinforced doors, wiring, metallic hums beneath the soil. This is not a vacation home. Panic had settled into the muscles of my body, a slow burn that never left. My stomach twisted with anticipation, dread gnawing at my lungs. Then came the drone incident. I launched a small camera drone to map the structures from above. Within minutes, electronics faltered. The feed flickered, then black. The drone spiraled, uncontrolled, and finally plunged into the ocean. Jammed, my mind concluded. Military grade? Sophisticated, not random interference. Something knew I was watching. My hands shook as I realized the enormity of their reach. They were untouchable, invisible, and infinitely patient. By nightfall, I was retreating through the forest when I heard the whispers, soft, almost imperceptible at first, like wind through the leaves. Then distinct voices, low and urgent, murmuring words I could not understand but understood all the same. They were warnings, or commands, or laughter. Fear twisted into guilt. Was it my presence that had awakened this? Did they sense my curiosity like a predator senses prey? Memory faltered, days blurred. Nights bled into one another. I couldn't trust my senses. I remembered the leaked Panama Papers connection, the aliases tied to human trafficking investigations. My mind ran through worst-case scenarios, constructing images I dared not speak aloud. Faces of the young people I had glimpsed on the beach danced in my memory, moving with strange precision, carrying cargo that should never exist. My hands were trembling constantly. Every vibration, every shadow, every distant thump of machinery triggered a cascade of panic. I stumbled into a clearing one evening to find a figure standing silently among the trees, tall, motionless, partially obscured by shadow. I froze, my own breathing loud, echoing in my ears. It did not move. I did not move. The wind held still. The world narrowed until all I could see was its silhouette and my reflection in the shallow water at my feet. And then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. No rustle of leaves, no footstep, just absence, leaving me shivering, uncertain, haunted. I returned to the dock cabin, but sleep offered no relief. Dreams slipped seamlessly into waking reality. I imagined voices inside the walls, children laughing or screaming beneath the surface, movements in the earth, my own name whispered by the wind, distorted, elongated. My mind fractured. Each day, each observation added layers of unease. The island was alive, not alive in the usual sense, but aware, sentient, responsive. I could feel it adjusting around me, hiding its secrets just out of reach, drawing me deeper into something I was neither prepared for nor allowed to escape. The first major revelation came suddenly. While following a path that led to a hidden vent, I glimpsed underground tunnels through a half-open door. Lights flickered, equipment hummed, figures moved. What purpose did this serve? Every logical explanation crumbled. I realized it wasn't smuggling in the conventional sense. Whatever was here, it was meticulously organized, self-sufficient, untouchable. My rational mind screamed to leave, to retreat to the nearest populated island. But curiosity anchored me, twisted me into silent compliance. I was becoming part of its rhythm. Ma could be fear, absorbed into its patterns. By the end of the second week, I no longer knew which parts of the island were real. Shadows moved independently. Voices existed in memory before sound. Even the water shimmered with a reflection I didn't recognize, echoing the compound's underground labyrinth. I understood then that I had crossed a threshold. There was no return. Time became meaningless. Days looped, Nights stretched like taffy, and the island consumed all markers of my previous life. The compound's infrastructure was vast, an entire ecosystem hidden beneath the sun-drenched paradise. Security cameras, underground vaults, satellite dishes, jamming equipment. Every movement above ground mirrored something below, a synchronized choreography I was not meant to observe. I no longer knew whether I was watching reality or a memory crafted for me. One morning, I found myself walking along the edge of a concrete bunker, its entrance partially obscured by shrubs. Something drew me closer. Inside, I saw empty crates labeled with cryptic codes, wiring that hummed faintly, monitors reflecting areas I had never been allowed to see. The island itself felt alive, as if it remembered every footstep, every glance, every secret I had glimpsed. Fear fused with awe. I was both witness and intruder, trapped in an orbit of observation I could never escape. The people I had glimpsed before the young men and women had vanished entirely, or perhaps they were always underground, working in silence. Their presence only a suggestion, a ghost in my peripheral vision. Time became layered. I could remember events that had not yet occurred, or perhaps it occurred in a parallel loop. The island's rhythm had entered my body, syncing with my heartbeat, shaping my perception. I understood that this was intentional. They wanted me aware, but never fully informed, a living observer of their work. Attempts to leave were thwarted in subtle ways. Boats seemed to falter. Engines refused to start. Weather shifted with improbable speed. The island created its own logic, bending reality to its will. I realized that the yachts, the alias accounts, the offshore companies, the military-grade systems, they were all part of a single mechanism, a web of secrecy designed to render the outside world irrelevant. I was trapped, not by walls, but by knowledge. One evening, I stumbled upon a hidden cove. Waves lapped softly, yet the water reflected shadows that shouldn't exist. Figures moved beneath the surface, or perhaps just reflections of memory. My own reflection twisted into something unrecognizable, eyes hollow, skin pale, posture rigid with tension. I felt a presence behind me, silent, patient, observing. He spoon around nothing. But the feeling remained, settling into my bones, an imprint I would never shake. By the third week, I realized the full horror. I would leave the island physically, but never mentally. Every dream, every reflection, every shadow would carry its mark. The island had claimed part of my mind. I understood then that its purpose wasn't just secrecy, or logistics, or crime. It was immortality of operation. It would continue, perfectly executed, untouchable, a living puzzle buried beneath paradise. And I, foolish and curious, had become part of its pattern. The last night, I sat on the cliff overlooking the harbor. The lights of the compound glimmered faintly in the distance, small points of human ingenuity, or something beyond human. Wind scraped across the glass of my binoculars, like skeletal fingers. Shadows stretched across the landscape, bending where they shouldn't. Time slipped. Figures appeared and disappeared. I could no longer tell whether I was awake or dreaming, or whether my own memories were being manipulated, remembered by the island itself. And then I understood. This place would exist long after me. It would continue to operate, unseen, untouchable. The yachts would dock. The underground tunnels would hum. The satellites would blink silently into space, and I would carry its weight in my mind forever. The island was alive, but not in a way that any human could fully comprehend. It remembered, it observed, it judged. And I just, one observer, one trespasser was marked. As dawn broke, I packed what I could, leaving nothing behind but footprints. The island shimmered behind me, waves curling like fingers, shadows bending unnaturally. I left physically, but I knew I would return in memory, in fear, in dreams. Nothing could erase it. Nothing could forgive curiosity. And as I sailed away, the final, unshakable truth echoed inside me. Some places are not meant to be known. Some places remember you, and you can never escape. Would you dare go back, knowing what waits? As the screen begins to fade, remember this: the darkness you just witnessed doesn't disappear when the video ends. It lingers. A collection of chilling encounters where innocent objects became vessels for something far more sinister. You'll find it right here on the end screen. But be warned, once you press play, the feeling of being watched may never leave you. And if you want to keep exploring the darkest corners of true horror, make sure you subscribe to Scary Dark Narrations. Turn on the notification bell, so you're always there when the next story crawls out of the shadows. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your lights low, and never forget: some horrors don't need permission to follow you home.